thank you for joining me again today for the Finding Hope After Loss podcast. Today I talked with Cara. She's a mother to 3 girls, including her daughter Emma Grace, who was stillborn at 40 weeks 22 years ago. She is an early childhood educator and a parenting coach who founded Core 4 Parenting. She now helps to empower new moms and help them learn how to enhance their baby's early learning. You can find her on Instagram or Facebook at Core 4 Parenting. Cara will also be launching a new podcast on January 3rd of 2023 called Transforming the Toddler Years. I know she will have a lot of great information to share, so be sure to tune in. Today, Cara and I discussed her loss experience, how she continues to parent Emma Grace, and the important issues she thinks should be discussed more about loss.
So hi everyone, I am here with Cara today. Cara, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me here, Sarah. This is an important part of my life that I love to share. So, I am a mom of 3 to our beautiful grown girls approaching adulthood. And I also have a little girl in heaven who I have parented since she was stillborn at 40 weeks and 1 day. So, my parenting journey has been complicated, intense, but also the most beautiful learning experience I've ever had. And I love sharing that with others.
I love that. And I love that, you say you're still parenting her in heaven because we always are their parents, even if they're not with us, and we're still always their moms. And I think some people tend to forget that when you can't physically see the child here.
Yes. And it's hard because as moms, our natural instinct is to do that. But the world that we live in, especially when you lose a baby, automatically tries to shut those doors down for you. It doesn't fit into their vision of what parenting is. And so it's uncomfortable and complicated. And I was not willing to do that. I said, she was our first. And so I had to parent her somehow. And in the beginning, it looked very different than it grew to look over time. We planted a burning bush, and I would go out every year and measure the bush, just like you would measure your child standing against the door jamb. We got a special fake Christmas tree that's just Emma Grace's. And every Christmas that rolled around, we pick that ornament that's just for her. And it goes on the tree, and there's a little ceremony around it. So as our living kids were born and they got to stay 3 and then 5 years after Emma Grace came and went, all that stayed true. I got to parent my little people by going to mommy and me play groups and going to ballet recitals. And I got to parent Emma by the traditions I set around keeping her spirit and her memory alive.
I love that you do those things. I love the measuring the bush, and I think that's amazing, the things that you do to keep her spirit alive. So I assume you talk to her about her with your other children. They know all about her, and do they ask questions about her, or do they talk about her often?
Sarah, that is all absolutely 100%. When our other girls came along, that was always part of my parenting plan. Not just because it's their birthright to know that they had an older sister, but also because I made a vow to myself that I would honor and respect each of my children for who they are. And that meant knowing that Emma Grace's spirit and characteristics and natural individualities that we would never know what they were here in the physical realm got to be hers. And then Claire's got to be Claire's, and Caroline's got to be Caroline's. And I wouldn't use my unknowing and my grief to shape my future children's lives. Like, that was a vow that I made to myself. So yes, there was a lot of talking, and they asked questions that were developmentally appropriate over the years, right? And they asked questions that showed who they are. I had one that would ask very cosmic, ethereal questions about, where she is and her spirit and all the fun things we do to remember her. And I had one that was way more literal and concrete. Like she wanted to know about, okay, we go to this gravestone, but like, is she actually here? Tell me what's under the stone. There's a box. Okay, what's in the box? And so, yes, the conversations grew with my children.
I love that too, that you can see, their different personalities just in the types of questions they ask and the information that they want to know.
Oh my
So,
gosh, yes.
is there anything you want to share about your actual loss journey itself?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first, I will share with you and your listeners that all I ever wanted to be was a mom. I was that kid at 10, 11, 12, and people would say, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And I'd say, "A mom." And that would freak them out a little because as a teenager, you're not really supposed to say that. But I knew in my gut and I knew in my intuition that I was here to be of service to little people, and I couldn't wait to be the mother role. Um, And so, after a picture perfect 40-week pregnancy, at 40 weeks and 1 day, being told that we were not coming home with a baby was the most devastating moment of my life. 40 weeks exactly, I went to my checkup. Everything was fine. I heard her heartbeat. I didn't feel a whole lot of movement, but that's really normal. Right at the end, she was head down, she was ready, everything was going to plan, as they say. 24 hours later, I woke up out of a sound sleep with a knowing. I didn't know what, there was a knowing that something wasn't right. And your head does funny things in those moments. It replays what people have been telling you. And as a first time mom, you have no relevant experience to look back on and say, oh, okay, I've experienced this once before. So I did what I did. I called all the right people. I asked all the right questions. And again, they were echoing, oh, I'm sure you're fine. At the end, things just get a little strange until she comes. It's fine. Lack of movement, no big deal. And I just couldn't let it go. So I drove myself to the emergency room. And at that point, they called my doctor, who said, she's here. Like you might actually just want to come join her if she's here. And they brought me up to the birthing center and searched and searched and searched for a heartbeat, only to find out once they turned on the ultrasound. Like they didn't even say anything yet, but just the vision. I've never seen a picture that was so quiet. It's like I could hear the silence on the monitor, and I just knew. I was by myself when I found out, and it took quite a while for them to get a hold of my husband. We live in rural Vermont, and this is 22 years ago. So cell phones were not really a thing. Service was for sure not a thing. So it was the proverbial make a phone call to the person who phoned somebody else, who goes in their car, who drives to the place, who says, oh, actually, he just left, who drives to the next place. So I was by myself for a long time with this life-changing knowledge. Delivered her and had 6 unbelievably precious and traumatic hours with her. Told her everything I thought she needed to know before she flew. After about 6 hours, I couldn't help it. I had to go to the bathroom because I had had a baby, right? My body still thought there was a baby. And so, Sarah, when I say this to people, it's hard for them to understand, but I know you will. When I came back from that bathroom break that takes far longer than you think it will, and I saw her in my husband's arms, I just knew. I knew our time together was over. I knew her spirit had flown. And I was so glad that I pushed. She was born at 3 a.m. So I was so glad I pushed myself to just stay awake and be with her for that amount of time. And then as far as why she left us, we were we did everything. We did the genetic testing, we did the whole thing. And what ended up happening is her cord grew at twice the normal rate that it was supposed to every month of pregnancy, but we had no way of knowing that. So instead of about 50 centimeters of cord, which is an average amount for a 40-week baby, she had 104 centimeters of cord in there with her. And that evening, when she moved a certain way, there was just too much of it. And it tied itself in what they call a true knot around her leg. And she was unable to access her oxygen.
Thank you for sharing that. I know, sometimes it's not easy to relive those moments. I know, I like to share the story of my daughter too, but every time it takes you right back there to like being there. And, I'm glad you had time to hold her and to, spend time with her, because those are the only moments we get, and I think sometimes people underestimate, how important it is to hold your baby, to see your baby, even if it's hard, to just push through and do it.
So grief is work. And I think that you can probably tell that, and I hope your listeners can too, that the fact that I can sit here 22 years later, time has done its job, right? But I did mine too. I did my grief work, not just in those 6 hours, but in the years that followed, by allowing it. Whenever it showed up, I gave into it. Whatever that meant, leaving a place, finding a closet, sitting in the car, I gave into it and I let it flow, because grief can be delayed, but it cannot be denied. It will show up. And if you don't allow it to show up in the way it wants to present itself, it will show up in physical disease. It will show up in breaking your emotional connections to others. It is not going away. So allowing it was number one, and then sharing it was number two. I've told my story thousands of times, and that's why I can sit here and do it in a very calm, collected way, because I continued to share her with others. And then I also found my thing. You got to find your thing. Some people love to bake. When they bake, they feel good. Like whatever feels good to you, find your thing and then honor your child with it. I'm a leader, right? That's what I do. I gather people and I inspire them. And so I started a support group, and I was able to be the hope for somebody else, even a year later when they were on day one. And for me, that was cathartic.
So I know you mentioned that you became a big support person for other people. Did you have a lot of support when you were going through your loss from family or friends or anybody else?
That is a great question. The answer is yes. I have an amazing family on both sides they were just there. They were always there, whatever was necessary, whatever crazy idea I had next, whatever, like, ooh, let's get together at her grave and play some music. Like, they were just there. Okay. So yes, I'm blessed that I had support. But again, let me remind you, this was 22 years ago. So the internet, not what it is today. I wanted to be connecting with other moms who were living this, who had lived it, who understood that we were now in this club together that no one asked to join. And I couldn't find them because blogging was just hitting the scene and there were no groups and just nothing. It was a void out there, which is why I created my own space in real life to help others. Yeah, but I will say that it is hard to find those people, but once you do, you just lean in, and they're really what get you through day to day. or minute to minute, as it were, because those nights can be long in the beginning.
You're so right about that. As you mentioned, it's a club that none of us wanted to be part of, but it's got really amazing people when you find them.
Mm-hmm.
So are you still doing the support group or not anymore?
So one of the things that is unique to my experience is where I live. Right? I live in rural Vermont, and so the per capita population here blessedly is small enough that the percentage, the 1 in 4 who are actually looking for support, is a really tiny number. And with the burst of all the ways that you can get active support through the internet, I do not do physical in person anymore, but I do still engage in those support platforms so that I can feel like I'm being a voice of hope.
I love that so much that you're still helping other lost moms. So why do you think it's important to share your story?
This is an interesting one. Loss is not new. The statistics around it have stayed the same for generations and generations. And we say, as a population now, we're more open to hearing about it and we talk about it more. But I would argue that we really don't. And I just think it's so important to share my story because there are people, even the friends and family of people that have had losses, they want to talk. They just don't know what to say. Right? There's still times that I hear about a really complicated, horrific loss, and I want to reach out and I go, ooh, but what would I even say that would make a difference? So it's important to just keep saying it because you never know who around you is ready to share what they want to share or going to stand up and say, oh my gosh, this happened to my best friend last month and I just don't even know what to do. Can you help me? That's why it's so important to keep talking. But I will say it can make people incredibly uncomfortable, and you got to know your crowd, right? So I have this thing I call the rule of 3. So if you and I met randomly at some networking meeting, and you ask me how many kids do you have, I say 3. And then you ask me how old they are, and I tell you their ages, 17, 19, and 22. And then you ask me what they're all doing in the world right now. And I'm like, if she's 3 questions in, she likely actually cares about the true response and wants to have a legitimate conversation. So now I'm going to tell her.
That's a great rule. I like that. Because that question is always hard for me to answer. How many kids do you have? Because you want to include all your children, but you don't want to always go into the story every single time, especially with someone that you'll never see again. Like, do you really want to go into it? So I love that. I think I'm going to adopt that.
Go for it. And then that third question, right? When they say, what are they doing in the world? And I say, oh, this one's a senior graduating high school. Oh, this one's moving soon and starting her new life. And the other one we lost when she was young. She's in heaven. You will, in that exact moment, know if that conversation is going to continue or if the person you're talking to is not going to be able to handle it.
So what are there any aspects of like loss that you think aren't talked about enough?
Well, that's a neat question. Any aspects of loss? I think that normalizing loss for what it is, instead of trying to qualify it by how you lost your baby, is not dealt with enough. It's interesting because it's dealt with by us. Like we seem like we have to defend ourselves right out of the gate. Right? I lost my baby. Oh, how far along were you? And now I'm in this weird murky space where I'm like, why does that matter? Why does that matter? Why does it matter if I went through infertility, which I didn't? I'm not saying I did. And I have just incredible compassion for those who ride that roller coaster. But what does it matter if I went through infertility and I lost the hopes and the dreams and the visions and the desires I had for that maybe baby? Or I was 8 weeks or I was 20 weeks and felt that baby kick already, or I was 40 weeks and had to deliver a child who wasn't breathing, or my child was 3 weeks and we thought there was a chance, but in the NICU, it didn't work out. What does it matter? Why do we have to qualify it? Why can't we just say, I lost my baby, and the other person say, that's so heartbreaking and I'm so sorry for you?
I totally agree with you on that. I feel, especially people who have early losses, they feel like, oh, I wasn't far enough along. I can't talk about it. And I'm like, no, you can talk about it. That was still your baby. And, as soon as you get that positive test, you start dreaming of your family and, your plans, and you lose all that too. You have every right to talk about your baby. So I think that is a great thing that society needs to work on.
They do.
So, parenting after loss, what has been like some of the hardest things for you with that?
So we opened up this conversation by me sharing that our household is very, first of all, I don't believe in acceptance. I get the stages of grief and they're very real and they're not linear, right? They do this weird infinity loopy thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not an acceptance person. I'm an integration person. I believe that we integrate our loss into our lives in a way that feels whole and manageable to who I am as a mom and to our family culture and the environment that we have inside our home. And so parenting after loss for me was fairly intuitive, especially with my science background as an educator and understanding the development of children's brains. Like I pulled it all together. I did all of it. The challenges were the world, right? In the insular space of our integrated family, my daughter, when she was younger, my youngest used to say, we have 3 kids, but only 2 sit at the dinner table. And I always thought what a cool book title that would be. Like that was a really safe place for us to just be whole. But the minute we went outside our doors is where it got tricky. In general parenting, they say parenting in public is the hardest part. Well, parenting after loss in public is hard. I remember a day when kindergarten rolled around, and it was day 2 of our Rainbow Babies kindergarten start. And it was draw your family, right? It was draw your family day. And I got a call from the school. And the teacher said, I think we might have a problem here. I'm not sure what's going on. And I was like, oh, Lord, it's day 2. What are we doing? And she's like, we're drawing our families. And I see you, and I see your husband, and I see a sister, and I see a dog and a cat. And then she says there's this other sister, and she drew her in heaven. And I was like, oh, we don't have a problem. That's a 100% accurate description and picture of our family. It was the teacher that had the problem. And so parenting my children to be socially and emotionally okay with our family's reality when they went out in public and they were met with resistance was where it got hard.
It always seems like it's the public and the society that's the problem, which I mean, I think it is, because it's just, like you said, not something that's talked about or accepted because it's outside the so-called normal.
Yeah, and to be fair, I mean, maybe I should rephrase that. I try to be very clear and fair with my words. I'm not sure this teacher was a problem, right? I shouldn't have said that. It was uncomfortable for her. It's not something that she came up against every day, and she didn't know how to handle it and how then to explain it or let my daughter explain it to the rest of the class, who's going to go home and say, guess what happened today, mommy and daddy?
Right.
Right. So that's where the edges started to get a little wonky, but it's so doable as long as you know what you're trying to achieve. What do you want for your living children? Whether they came before or after your loss, what do you want for them? Do you want them to normalize loss? Do you want them to understand that grieving doesn't mean we're sad forever? That the amount that mommy is sad is actually equal to the amount that she loved and loves your sister or brother, and that's how much she loves you too. Like, what do you want your kids to take from this? Do you want them to understand that compassion is important when you see people who are hurting? I did. And so that's what I taught them. And then it actually opened up all those other conversations, right? I was able to say, there's lots of people out there who've never experienced this. And because they haven't, and thank goodness, they don't understand. So it's our job to help them understand, so just so much learning. That's all we do our whole lives, is we just learn.
I love that approach, though, to just think about how you want them to go out into the world and present it. And I think that's great. That's, and it's teaching them a lot of valuable information too, because then they can go on to help normalize the issues as the siblings, from the sibling perspective. And I think that's great.
And the other thing is, we don't escape this in our normal lives. My kids are older now, which means their grandparents are older now. It is a literal matter of time before they lose, for the first time in their active life, somebody that matters that much to them. So to have this foundational knowledge that we can't escape it, but we can do it, is going to be really important when they go through a huge loss for the first time.
You're so right about that. None of us escape grief. Escape grief. We all have it in some form at some time.
Yeah.
So do you have any advice for someone who's going through a loss?
Well, I touched on a few action points earlier. But I would just say, if you're actively going through the loss right now, find someone, whether it is a trusted support family member, a therapist, maybe even someone you find online in one of the curated support groups. I wouldn't go into the public ones. Like Share, SHARE, is a national organization for pregnancy and infant loss support. And they have a lovely curated Facebook group. I would say find somebody that you click with, that you trust, and who's willing to believe for you. Because when you're in the depths of it, you really do feel like you're going through it all alone. And it's so dark that you can't believe that the light will ever shine again. So what I used to say to the people who I had the privilege and honor of sitting with in the hospital, holding their babies, helping them dress their babies and bathe their babies before they said goodbye, is I will believe for you. Let me be the believer, and you just be in this minute. Find that person.
I love that. We all need, that person. And sometimes it can be someone you don't even expect it to be.
Mm-hmm.
You expect it to be one person and it's not them, and you have a completely new person appear in your life just for that purpose.
Yes.
So do you have anything else that you want to share or add about loss or parenting after loss or anything along those lines?
Wow. I'll just finish with my personal recent experience. As I mentioned, I don't know if I said that actually, September 8th, recent 2022 was Emma Grace's 22nd birthday. And it was a really freeing one for me. So if you are going through loss, just like we said, the world kind of defines the parameters. They also give you milestones. The first year birthday, right? 5 years old was going to kindergarten. That was a really hard year because there was a worldly milestone that we were missing. 10 years was really hard. They're not always going to be, and also just know that there are some years that aren't going to be as hard as others. And it's okay that you're not as devastated that day of the year. And then some years are hard, or 16 was hard because they said, oh, she should be getting her driver's license. 18 because she was graduating high school. 21, we all got out in front of her burning bush, which, by the way, is so large, there's not a chance that I could measure it anymore, and clinked our glasses. And, 21, drinking age. 22, something happened. I no longer have a measuring stick provided for me. I just now get to love her. I don't know when she would have got married, if she would have got married. I don't know if she would have had kids, when my grandkid would have come along. I don't know if she was going to marry a girl or a boy. I don't know any of these things, and it's okay. So being able to let go of the what ifs and the if thens and the I wonders frees you up. So if, unlike me, you're able to do that before 22 years go by, you're going to change the experience of your everyday grief.
I love that too. I mean, I love so much of what you say. It's just, I think, just part of it is, being 22 years in versus being, freshly into it. And I love your perspective on it, because I'm 4 years in. So I feel like, I have still a different perspective of, someone newly in it, but to hear your experience 22 years later I like hearing it.
Well, Sarah, as you approach 5 years old and the would-be kindergarten mark, I will be your person.
Thank you. I appreciate that, because next year is going to be a hard one.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I really appreciate you coming on and, sharing your story and your experience. And it's been really nice talking with you.
Well, thank you for having me. This is something that matters. And as we said in the beginning, this is how I parent her. I still get to.
Thank you so much, Cara, for sharing your experience and your story with us. I love so much how you still parent Emma Grace and how you mark the milestones. I also think you bring up such an important point about how we shouldn't have to justify our loss. Our loss is a loss. We should never have to say, oh, I was only 6 weeks, or anything like that. Let's just normalize saying, I'm so sorry you lost your baby, instead of all the other insensitive comments people tend to say. Let people grieve the way they need to grieve and on their own timeline. I also agree with Cara's point that we have to do the grief work. Time will do its job, but as she said, we need to do ours as well. It's too easy to try to push the grief back and just simply not deal with it. I know this from experience. We have to let ourselves grieve. We have to let ourselves feel sad, feel angry, feel all the other emotions that come with it. I know it's not always fun and it's not always comfortable, but I promise it's necessary for our healing. Thank you so much for joining me again today, and remember, we're all in this together.